Hello, my friends. How's it going? How's work? How's play? How's sleep? Having any cool dreams? Or maybe that's about play and work. Mmm. The over section of them all is your dreams. Cross section, over section, both. So, welcome to Rendezvous with Jamie McGlue, or Rendezvous with yourself. Um, so today's topic is something very near and dear to my heart, which is seeing clearly, uh, not in the literal sense necessarily, because I might not be an expert on that, but in the more figurative sense of knowing what's real and knowing what's right. So, I guess intellectual and ethical vision or capacity to map your environment and understand what's going on. Um, I'm not an expert in that, but I do try pretty hard. So, you know, um, and I did study philosophy at university, and there's some stuff I learned in critical thinking, which was a unit there in first year that I think was really amazing, and I wish everyone learnt at school. I wasn't taught it at in high school or primary school, but it's really useful. Like there are some principles which I'm going to share today, and also some of my own thoughts of just kind of practical strategies for knowing what's actually going on. Very important, like these days, I would say. Um, and But yeah, there's people throughout time. I was blessed to be presented with, okay, here's a textbook, and then we're doing lectures and what do you call it, tutorials and stuff, investigating. Okay, here's a little thing someone's written. Um, okay, convert it into a logical argument. Like, what's the skeleton, the logical skeleton within this? Not the emotion, not the and there's, as we'll talk about, there's all these little fallacies, like these errors of logic, which you can make where no, it doesn't connect. That's not a valid move. And so how to detect them and kind of say what is the argument and how to assess it for its merits, um, and thus to be able to know like what's real, yeah, basically. And so I was blessed to be able to be, exposed to the inherited wisdom of like thousands of years of people thinking about this, how to know what's real and what's right. And so that's what we're going to get into a bit today. Um, so first of all, basically critical thinking. Okay, actually, first of all, music. Much more important than the head is the heart, I'd say. The head can follow the heart, basically. Um, and but by the heart, that would mean like your soul. I don't mean your primal emotions. I wouldn't. That's not your soul. That's your body more. Um, so the heart, like the heart that is in Otis Redding as he's singing, you know, and or it's in a beautiful movie, and you just feel this upwelling of emotion, that kind of stuff. Not so much we're watching football, or I'm looking at some nasty bit of grease and like what do I feel? Not that kind of emotions of disgust to protect yourself from contagion, or anger to defend rightful territory, or fear to avoid threats, or I guess what would that be? Not greed, but appetite for beneficial things that are beneficial for you. So music, I'd say, is that kind of thing from the deeper heart. So here's a little bit of music to begin. Days roll as the waves, more into the maze. The cycle repeats, oh, and again. The hours pass, endure the farce, to make ends meet. Oh, and again. Age now remembers an origin tender, and wisdom smiles, oh, and again. Oh, and again. Ever much the same, forever and always, once known by name. And I guess, I don't know, music's beautiful. And so maybe that's why I put it at the beginning of all of my podcasts, because it's just beauty. I think it's more important than anything else. Slash, but I think it's kind of not just that. It's like you connect, you exit your head. And that's very important, especially for this episode about critical thinking. I think there's a lot of very, very intelligent people out there, who, huge heads, from here to here, heads broader than their shoulders, and but they can't stop thinking, and you know, uh, some of them might take pills to fall asleep because they can't stop thinking, even, but or people who don't know what you mean. If you mean that, well, they wouldn't believe you if you said, do you ever like? It's possible to be here, conscious but not thinking. So they're not aware of that dimension, which ironically, people, kind of very simple people, put it politely or whatever, would be more intimate with just naturally, but they might not know what it is. Or, kind of more average intelligence people, you'll encounter this maybe during music, like where you're just there, or during, eating or making love, or watching a sunset or something, or or exercising. So where, or doing something thrilling, where you're kind of get into the moment and you leave your thinking mind. But then if you train that and if you develop that, that's what spirituality is really all about. Real spirituality. It's not like wearing beads and, making towers out of crystals and stuff, although, there might be a place for some of these things. But like at the heart of it, the whole thing about spirituality is it's very serious, and it's not very serious, but it's as serious as anything, you could say. Like, and in a way it's more serious than everything else. But the heart of it is very playful, and blissful. But it's about sanity, and it's about waking up. And a large part of that is about being able to step outside of the intellect, and to be able to use the intellect as a tool. So that can sound kind of threatening to a Western-based, like, intellectual, like from that the tradition of like, oh no, that's when we get into, woo-woo or whatever the word is, but the idea of that it's superstition, or people believe whatever. If you don't have the intellect then to guide it, then, all hell breaks loose. And in a way that could be true. Like, I'd say, there's definitely a place for the intellect, but it needs to be balanced. And you can go off into crazy territory if you're not careful about thinking. And that's what I'm trying to do today. We're going to talk about is how to know what's going on with, But so a big thing is that using mindfulness, or, spirituality, whatever you want to call it, awakening, to create space as often as you can, so where you just kind of exit the stream of time and you're just here in the present moment, and yeah, create a little bit of space like I just tricked you into there. Like this. Oh, space is nice. So that, I think, is like fertilizer for your mind, basically. You can think much more clearly when you give it enough rest. You kind of give that space around it. So that'd be one thing. I think for critical thinking and seeing clearly, it's essential to have a balance of thinking with just feeling or just being. So you can connect to your breath, etc. Episode 7 on awakening, I go into some detail, I think, definitely on how to do that as best as I understand how the process works. So that would be one thing. Now, to the heart of what we're doing today, I'm going to give you basically, I'm going to give you some practical kind of ideas. Probably maybe you do a bunch of these things already, or maybe, and then fine, cool. It's refreshing, refining your that in your mind. Or maybe, you haven't like really been exposed to these ideas before, in which case I'm like, hey, look, there's a door over there. What's through the door, man? Go look through the door. And that's kind of exciting. But yeah, my goal here is to keep this kind of practical. I'd encourage you to go look up online. Apparently there's some verb like oligarch it. You can oligarch it or Skynet it. There's some sort of term, but I say look it up anyway. You can look it up on the internet and critical thinking, principles of critical thinking, and so there'll be people who can explain it much better than me, but or much better than I can without notes. But I'm here just going to try to give you some like little nuggets of just food for thought. So first of all, there's a critical thinking it doesn't mean to criticize everything. It means to critique everything. So you question everything. You don't just take information for granted and don't just assume it's true. So now that raises a few questions. First of all, that raises the question of, what's the balance between can you question everything? Is there not a balance where you need to just trust to a certain extent? And yeah, there is a balance. So that's a good question. And then what can you trust? How can you know what's real? What is the method of knowing what is valid? If we are going to think for ourselves, and I think this is crucial at this point in history, especially in the West, that people start thinking for themselves, because a lot of the institutions are getting infected with what you could call insanity, or kind of like a social contagion of ideological zealotry, whereby there's these kind of echo chambers and tunnel vision going wild, mixed in with corruption and short-term profit seeking, so causing some serious threats. So, which is also an opportunity for growth, but I think it's very important, both for your personal fulfillment and happiness, but also for like the very survival of our civilization and the flourishing of our civilization. It's a great thing we can do to start applying critical thinking more and more for ourselves, and then also in communication with people. Okay, what's the balance between just trusting stuff and then questioning? That's one question we will look at. Then the second question is, how do we know? Like, what is the system? How do you know what's real and right? So that's a good question. And like, so in other words, we could break that into two halves, kind of. What are valid methods of logic, and what are invalid methods of logic? So that would be called, the latter would be called fallacies, right? And so there's that. And then, kind of thirdly and finally, what are some practical examples of how to, kind of engage with people and engage with information in a way where we can learn and not get tricked. So yeah, first of all, then, um, the balance between trusting and questioning. You can't question everything, but you can. But no, you can't simultaneously question everything, or you shouldn't, I should say. Um, like there's certain things like, oh, is it all an illusion? That's a good thing to question. Oh, is this all just an illusion? But then it's like, okay, then I should question my questioning. Okay, maybe it's an illusion, or maybe the idea that it's an illusion is an illusion, or like maybe it's not an illusion, you know. So okay, well, if it's 50-50, what am I just going to sit here and think about that all day? And while the world has burning cities and wailing babies and stuff, like, no, I think something inside me is telling me I should get to work and try to enjoy my life and try to work to help others be able to enjoy this life. And so, um, yeah, so I would say uh, that's a simple example of there's certain assumptions we have to make in order to just to there's a point of diminishing returns with questioning things. So you question it, and then if it doesn't yield further questions, then okay, what do I think? It can go in the yes pile, the no pile, or the maybe pile. Is the world and is existence some sort of illusion? Yeah, maybe. Okay, put it in the maybe pile. But is it practical to keep thinking about it? Well, no, right now it's not. Maybe it will be at some point, but right now, no, I don't need to keep thinking about it. Okay, now I don't have enough logic to justify that, oh, what should I do? So you just kind of wing it, follow, okay, what feels right to me? But so in pursuing, trying to be logical, there's a place for just, intuition and just feeling like, well, I feel like these, crying babies are probably deserve a presumption of existence rather than a presumption of, oh no, you're probably an illusion, right? Or are all my friends actors? Is it like solipsism? Am I the only real person? Maybe, you know, but that's gonna think about the consequences of having that point of view. Kind of leads to a not such a beautiful existence. So okay, well, I don't have enough information here, so I'm just going to assume that we're all real, and that way, you know, if I'm wrong and they're all actors, all right, whatever, fine. I'm living my life and being a good person. It's a good story. But if they're not actors, then if I were to assume they were, that would be like a terrible act of shameful faithlessness. And not to mention just kind of boring, not doing anything, or like kind of getting distracted. So, okay, think about it. Oh, interesting. And then move on. All right, is the world run by lizard men? Maybe. Do I have enough evidence? No. Okay. Throw that in the maybe pile. And you can lean one way or the other. And if you want, you could like, that's a thing where I've kind of felt like, well, I think there's more beneficial things for me to think about. And I used to think that was totally crazy. But upon reflection, it's like, what do we actually know? If we're honest with ourselves, it's not a great deal. We don't know a great amount of things. So I would say it's possible the world's run by some aliens and we just, they're just kept out of sight because that would spook everyone, and then it's easier to control people by keeping it behind the curtain. Plenty of crazy things have happened in history, but I haven't been drawn to go look into that deeply, so I couldn't say, oh yeah, I've seen this evidence that it rules it out or something, But I go along with my day. I proceed as if, yeah, that's probably not true. But also I think some people will be like, oh, that's ridiculous. Of course that's not true, but then that's where I would think, yeah, well, be careful about not questioning enough or like making assumptions. Because here, okay, maybe it makes no difference whether, the world's run by little, green men or whatever. But the ways in which you approach this question will probably be mirrored in other questions. So, is this person lying in my business dealings? Or is this politician trustworthy? You want to be, in general, leaning towards questioning everything, because there's more damage in not questioning enough than in questioning too much. So maybe you looked into some crazy theories, and later on you're like, all right, well, I was wrong about that. And you want to make sure you don't go too far into, some confirmation bias and believing in some crazy stuff. But we have to also admit that I think the rise in quote unquote conspiracy theories or theorists and all that is because people are starting to think for themselves more. And that actually is what we need. So it's a symptom of a good trend. People are starting to think more for themselves than they used to. And honestly, a lot of tragedies through history would have been avoided if people were thinking more for themselves. Nazi Germany, the Vietnam War, with the Gulf of Tonkin false flag thing, war on terror. Oh, we're going to war on an emotion, are we? Okay. Why are we going to Iraq? And a lot of people are already clued on, but not enough, it seems, to be able to stop these systems of power from going and launching a war for profit. The COVID situation, going back to, reefer madness. Yeah, let's make this herb illegal, even though, it was about to replace, hemp was just about to replace William Randolph Hearst's monopoly via, paper, and the decorticator was about to innovate and cause this very environmentally friendly product to be brought onto the market, and he would have to adapt and lose a monopoly, and, he controlled the forests, which he also controlled the paper mills, which he turned the trees into paper, and he controlled the newspapers, where he'd turn the paper into newspapers, and to a large extent had a huge political influence, where he'd turn the newspapers into public opinion. And so he shut down he made marijuana illegal in the United States. That's just one example where that was if people were thinking the way they are these days, people would have been screaming about it. They didn't have the internet. There was less awareness of the amount of tomfoolery we're up against. And so people generally just kind of took it for granted. All right, authority figure says this is what's going on, it must be going on. So I think it's regrettable that, there's people who go too far in believing what I would think are probably wrong things. But I'd say it's we don't want to get rid of that tendency. We just want to moderate it and make it more reasonable, and make these people be able to say, look, okay, I think, lizard men run the earth, but be able to say, but would you agree that you don't know for certain that it's possible that they don't, but it just looks like it? Maybe, these theories are being put out there by, just governments just to discredit the opposition or something by making them look crazy. Would you agree that that's possible? And if they say, no, it's impossible, then okay, we've got a problem. Like, you've gone straight into insanity. But hopefully they would recognize, well, yeah, technically it's possible, 1% chance or whatever. So that's the kind of thing. I think awareness of critical thinking can allow us to have better conversations like this, where we can get people to kind of be able to agree more by sorting through the issues in a more nuanced way, where it's not you're wrong and I'm right and we just shout at each other. But yeah, so conspiracy theories, quote unquote, or whatever, it's just a symptom of, it's like a toddler learning to walk, It's a good thing. Yeah, you're falling over, maybe you're bumping stuff, smashing vases, bruising your knees or whatever, but this is progress. We're starting to walk. We're starting to think for ourselves. So, sip of tea. So, right. So how much do we question? How much do we just accept things as it is what it, taking it at face value? So when you're younger, I guess you need to do that more, because you need to, and look, I won't spend half an hour thinking about that question, but there is a place for just accepting what people tell you and trying to trust them, because essentially, but I think because we don't have enough time to look into everything, so we are finite beings, and we have many things we have to do. Knowing what's going on in the world is important, at least for a significant minority of the population. I think if you just want to, play sport and hang out and have a good time with your buddies and your family, that's totally reasonable. That's a good life, And if that's what's satisfying to you, then I think that's what you should do. That's what I would do if I were you. but you must acknowledge that that is dependent upon a certain subculture in the society, which is religiously, obsessively paying attention to what's real, what is true. You can call that the intelligentsia or the intellectual class. In our, I'd say, the modern day West, intellectual kind of is like a dirty word almost, because a bunch of them are, freaking idiots, I'd say. And it's gotten very classist and uppity and unreasonable. But it is a crucial, beautiful organ of society. You need the thinkers. Because if you don't, then there's also the power-hungry subculture, and they're just going to try to take over because they're hungry. People do things to satisfy their hunger. There's a certain subset of humans who, are power-hungry. It's so crazy how sometimes people will think, well, why would people want to take over the world? It's like, okay, go read some history books. That's why. Who knows what it is in the depths, but we know that's a thing, and this is part of critical thinking. It's pattern recognition, right? So look, this has happened throughout history. Reductio ad absurdum is basically reduce something to the absurd. So okay, if you're right that the government is always trustworthy, okay, so then if that's true, then throughout time, if they in general are trustworthy, then you would expect them logically to be trustworthy in the future and in the past, right? So let's go see. And then, but if they're trustworthy, then why were they lying to the public here, and here? Oh, maybe your premise that the government is always trustworthy is wrong, because it seems to be contradicted by some other things we know. Which do we know is stronger? The government can always be trusted, or let's say, what's the one? Operation Northwoods was a real thing, where the American government military planned to launch false flag attacks against itself via blowing up an airline drone and making it look like it was full of American civilians, and attacking Guantanamo Bay themselves, and a few things like this, and blaming it all on Cuba in order to launch an invasion of Cuba, which the military wanted. JFK, it was all set to go, just needed JFK's signature, and he refused to give it. So it didn't happen. So that's a fact. We know that for sure. We got the documents online. You can look it up. So which do we know more? That is true, or the American government, not the American, but just governments in general can always be trusted? Oh, okay, clearly Northwoods thing, that we know for sure. The other thing is more like, well, where's the evidence for that? Seems to be contradicted by some other things. So you weigh things up and you go, okay, well, I guess my original premise was wrong, because otherwise you wouldn't see these examples of abuses of power, etc. So, but we'll talk more about that in a moment. But basically, the idea of how much can we trust, I think the ideal way to do it, I think, is you cultivate your own awareness, right? Meditate as much as you can, for one thing, like we mentioned. But it's difficult. I mean, I think you need to find people who you can trust. And so there are certain people like, say, Joe Rogan, Aubrey Marcus, Jordan Peterson, Dave Smith. I don't know. It depends on the field, Peter Schiff for finance stuff to some extent, or whatever, economic stuff. There's all these people who they've got a certain range of competence where I have recognized through pattern recognition, okay, you make sense of a lot of things. You put them in a very coherent narrative, which has far fewer internal contradictions than other people's. You admit a bunch more things. So there's many narratives, say, in the mainstream media, which, they kind of make sense, but unless you introduce a certain fact, which totally makes it contradictory now. So people who have more internal cohesion with their narratives, their ideas, there are fewer contradictions. In general, that's a sign, a symptom, or an indicator of truth or that it's closer to the truth. Now, we're not going to get at objective truth, except if you stop thinking. That's the objective truth. Look around you, just the physical presence of the universe. That is truth. The present moment is truth. But what we're talking about in terms of understanding what's the nature of this or that, or who's doing this and why are they doing it, those kinds of abstractions from the present moment, we're not going to get a full picture ever, but we can just get closer and closer maps of what's going on. And that's all we need, really. That's plenty, And so what I do is there's people who, they make sense to me, and especially if they can predict the future, like they say, okay, and so I would say this is going to happen and this, based on their ideas. And then it does happen. Then that kind of like, all right, that makes them more credible. It's explanatory power and predictive power. But then say someone who they say something's going to happen and then it doesn't, and they start explaining it away, then that's where, okay, maybe, we have to take what you're saying with a grain of salt, a pinch of salt. Maybe you're not as clued on as I thought. When people are wrong about something and they admit that they're wrong, that's also a very good sign. Okay, so they're an open system. They're taking in more information and they're willing to adjust their ideas. They're not attached to their ideas. That's good. That's healthy. If people double down and start to try to distract things and, avoid admitting that they were wrong, then that's dangerous. And that's a red flag of like, okay, you're probably unreliable. And so then if I find someone who I've been kind of thinking was reliable and then that happens, then I have to kind of go through and go, okay, what else? What have I kind of taken on board from this person, perhaps without filtering it carefully enough, where it may have become a belief I have, because they're actually an impure filter, of information. You want someone who's giving you their honest opinion. They may have an opinion, they probably do, or they definitely have an opinion, but their opinion is probably coloring their presentation of information, everyone's, including mine. But people who are trying to be honest about their opinions, and they're trying to give you, more than anything, they're trying to give you facts, or you could say potential explanations. Like, say, I did an episode on COVID and I talked about the mainstream view. This is what they say happened. These are some other possibilities, which seem to incorporate more data into them, and they have fewer contradictions. So which one do you think is more real? So I'm presenting both of them. I'm not trying to hide one, So I have my opinion, and it's pretty obvious what it is, but on some things, I don't have a fixed opinion on other things, but there's certain things where it's gone from the maybe pile to the yes pile or the probably pile. And so, but I'm accepting and admitting the limits of my knowledge and letting you decide what you think. That's the kind of filter. That's a good filter for information. And so people like that, I try to cultivate them and help me so they do a bunch of legwork and I can kind of absorb the distilled product of what they've been filtering through their own consciousness. Then that's what you're doing with me right now. I'm doing that. I've been doing that, thinking about things my whole life, and then now putting it out here, and you can kind of take it on board as, okay, interesting. Is there anything to that? And, critical thinking means don't just, of course, you're not just going to assume what I'm saying is true or useful. You should be filtering it all. It's like a whale, right? So the whale just opens its big mouth, and then all the seawater flushes in, and then it closes its mouth, and its bristles, I'm making a bristles with my hands here. They kind of like, two intermeshed toothbrushes. They create a kind of wall which water can then be flushed out of, but the krill, which it wants to eat, get trapped and stay inside, and then the whale eats the krill. So it kind of takes it all in and then puts it through this filter, and all the good nutritious stuff stays there, and all the useless seawater gets flushed out. So that's basically roughly, not exactly, what's happening with critical thinking when it's functioning properly is and so this would be a practical thing you can do, I think, to be more logical when you're engaging with ideas and people, whether it be through someone's talking to you or you're reading, is to really listen to them and try to imagine that what they're saying is true. And don't just be immediately trying to think, okay, what are the holes in this thing? No, first try to, hear them out and try to see how it might be true. And then things where you think like, I guess it's useful to be going, oh, that seems like a problem. Okay, but set it aside for now. And try to imagine how they might be right. And try to see the strengths of their argument. And go, okay. And then, so you take it all in, basically. You're not shutting it down immediately. Let it all in, like the whale, And people are afraid of doing that because they think they're going to lose their minds or get tricked or something. And if you're at a very low level of intelligence, then, and look, I'm not judging anyone. I think we're all, the same branches on the same tree. I'd be judging myself if I was to judge another. Like, I'm not very good at a bunch of things. So I don't feel bad about that. I feel like, okay, well, I'm good at all these other things. So that's fine, and I can get better at a lot of things if I want to. So it's beautiful, great game, there's no problem there. And that frees you up to acknowledge and to praise and genuinely admire and appreciate other people's triumphs. But nonetheless, to be able to do that, you have to also admit other people's failings. And so, and that's I think you can have the deepest kindness and the deepest admiration for people when you can have an objective view and admit like, yeah, that person's really bad at this. They're really good at that though, So people who, the universe hasn't blessed them with great cognitive power. So their soul is just as powerful as anyone else. It's just, their consciousness. They are the universe. They are life experiencing itself from the inside out. And yet, in terms of being able to apply their mind to problem solving and mapping out the territory in order, in terms of what's right, what's a good idea to do, and what's real. So values and beliefs, you might say, is and ought be. So, or is and ought, you could say. So if you've got if you have less cognitive power, less ability to apply your mind with critical thinking, then yeah, I guess there is a danger of getting tricked. But then you're probably not going to be thinking about these things very much anyway. You're probably going to be acting more upon intuition, and that's fine. I think the real key is who I'm talking to now are people who are free thinkers. I encourage anyone to try to become a free thinker, and if you feel like you're not an intellectual, you can if you feel like, oh, that seems beautiful, then read more and don't put limits on yourself. See if you can kind of expand your mind, and like we're babies and we're all growing, and I don't believe in labeling people in general. So I think there's a time and place for labels, but in general, it's not a good idea. It gets in the way of things. So, but nonetheless, people, I think if you're thinking about these things, if you're even listening to me right now, then you don't have to be worried of getting infected by like crazy ideas. What you should really be worried about is, well, there's one idea that's very infectious, which you should be afraid of. And that's the idea that you should be worried about new ideas. The idea that you're going to get overwhelmed if you open your mind to other information, that's like a virus, that's a Trojan horse, which is just going to set up a bunch of blind spots and that are going to be really troublesome for you, where you're going to forget that you've forgotten, and you're going a downward spiral of decreasing consciousness because you've set in, I mean, I don't know how that works exactly. I'd imagine you could get out of that, but where, you're kind of lying to yourself, and I don't know, you'd hope you wouldn't get used to that. But, I think you can listen to anybody, whether you like them or not, and, try to imagine that they're right. And then after you've done that, okay, you say, oh yeah, they could be right with this, so that's a good point, and that there, well, it kind of seems kind of crazy, but is there any truth to that? Or maybe this tiny thing there, that could be kind of true. So you notice things you wouldn't otherwise notice because you're not, instead of shooting it down, because, that thing doesn't make sense, shoot it down. So no, you take it in and you see Is there anything of value? Okay, great. And then you critique it. You try to break everything down. So you've tried to take it in and build it up, see how it makes sense. Now you try to break it down and with logic. So you go, okay, and then we'll talk in a minute about some specific strategies, but you test it, and then whatever's left after you've bombed it, basically, then okay, that withstood the assault of my logic against it. I couldn't find holes in it. Okay, I guess for now it's, either it's in the maybe pile or it's in the probably pile or the yes pile, or it's in the no pile if it, got broken down. But so there's that process of allowing everything in, which includes trying to imagine it's true and see, steel man the argument as opposed to straw manning it. Make it the strongest version you can, and then see if you can prove it wrong. And then you might learn something by doing that. And then, in university, I wrote an essay about whether drugs should be legalized, and I was going to write no, of course all drugs shouldn't be legalized. Then in studying it, I was keeping an open mind and reading things, and at the end, when I had all the information, I was kind of thinking it over. I came to the conclusion that actually they should all be legalized, which was a bit of a surprise for me, but pretty cool though, because I was like, oh wow, this is what's happening. This is the process of learning. And so I wasn't attached to the idea. I didn't make it into part of myself and go, oh no, I can't, just have to ignore this now and repress some awareness of, the fact that I'm living a lie, and that I'm, disconnecting myself from my own sense-making faculties. But instead I went, okay, well, that's the conclusion. I think actually it seems like it does make sense to legalize all the drugs. So that's it. You let it all in, then you can try to shoot it down and prove things wrong, whatever stands after. So that's the basic idea of critical thinking. And you do that yourself as much as you can, but then, we're all busy. So I think for a lot of things, I'll have people who, okay, you're not really knowledgeable about that. You're really knowledgeable about that. This thing, sometimes you're knowledgeable. So whatever you say, I'm going to kind of filter it extra carefully. Or you've got that bias, I've noticed. It seems like you miss a few things. I know this is true. And you said the opposite, or you said you weren't sure about it. So then that goes, okay, then maybe, there's other things like that where you're not totally aware. So some certain piece of sources of information, I will filter more than others. And so I have that network of people who I listen to through podcasts mostly. But then if I notice, someone has lied or someone has made an error, but especially if they've lied, then basically, that, it takes a lifetime to build trust and a moment to break it. So, if I notice someone lying, then kind of like they'd have to go demonstrate some sort of evidence of some huge inner transformation for me to be able to start taking on their opinions more seriously again. However, there is the genetic fallacy. I know I'm kind of jumping all over the place here, but it's very kind of complicated. So the idea of critical thinking, I was hoping to present it a bit more category by category, but I guess this makes sense this way. So one flaw, one error of logic is the genetic fallacy, where you say, oh, Hitler was a vegetarian, therefore, vegetables are bad, because Hitler killed a bunch of people. So, well, no, there's plenty of good people who have been vegetarians also. So how does that explain it? That's a reductio ad absurdum. Yeah, true. Okay, well, okay, maybe actually it's not connected. Maybe someone can be a bad person or a crazy person, and yet they could have values or beliefs which are actually good. Maybe it's not all black and white, right? So that's the genetic fallacy, is this idea which has been kind of distilled over time, that just because someone you don't like has a certain idea doesn't mean that you should immediately disregard that idea. Actually, it's completely unrelated. They may have stumbled upon a correct idea. They might be wrong about almost everything else, but have stumbled upon the correct idea here. So you don't want to deprive yourself of that truth to improve your life and the world and the life of all those around you. So so here, like say someone's lied to me, I won't then presume everything they're saying is wrong, but I will just be more careful. And I won't put them on that list of like, oh, you said this? Okay, I'm going to presume it's probably true. It's in the probably pile. There's some people where I'll put in the probably pile. Maybe Majid Nawaz says something about, politics. I would go, okay, probably pile. Like, I'm not going to put it in the definitely pile unless I can look at it and find, the evidence. But if I'm busy and I look at something, okay, from what I've seen, he's very diligent, very careful, very insightful, and he's got a good heart. That's what it seems like to me from what I have seen of him and watching him for hours on podcasts, seeing his facial, expressions and, seeing him present information and it linking up with things I already know, etc., dealing with whatever the limits of his knowledge, pattern recognition. I've gone, okay, I trust you, more or less, right? So, but you could still make mistakes. I'll put it in the probably pile. But then there's other people where I'll be like, yeah, I'm not totally sure if I can trust you. So I'll put it in the maybe pile, the possibly pile, because you could be trying to mislead me. Or maybe you have good intentions, but you're just less reliable. Certain people, I feel like they've got good hearts, but then they're like, yeah, secret space program, man. Like we're on Mars and stuff. Where I'm like, you could be right, but I'm getting this sense like I saw a few things here and there where like, it seems like you weren't very careful there. It seems like you're a bit relaxed. Maybe you're very tuned into your intuition, but maybe you're not careful enough. And so I felt like, okay, no, I'm going to, keep this filter pretty tight here because I can't just assume I think you've got a good heart, but maybe your head's not functioning enough there where you could get tricked. And that's a very common thing for good people to be tricked. So, that's where people might say, no, that person's really good. They're really good. Like, yeah, but I just think, there is such a thing as good people who get tricked and who are too lax with their critical thinking. So that, cultivate this network of people who can save you time by providing you shortcuts to awareness of what's going on. And you cultivate them. So you've got your direct relationship with knowledge, but then when you find other people who are trying to find knowledge and grow and understand, you can use them as a time-saving mechanism, but you must keep assessing them diligently to notice, do you need to downgrade their position in your mind and kind of therefore increase the filters on them and go, okay, do I need to be more careful with that source of information? That goes for newspapers, New York Times, like, yeah, let's go invade Iraq, sure. Or, all the COVID stuff, like all this stuff like science says we need to do this, follow the science. It's like, this follows a pattern of totalitarianism, actually, this whole thing. And the science says, vitamin D, take vitamin D. That's the main thing. And yet it's never mentioned. Cut obesity, change your lifestyle, start sleeping better. Don't be so afraid. Be careful, but don't be afraid. As much as possible, be fearless. You won't be able to be fearless, probably but be as fearless as possible, but careful and make good decisions. No, you didn't hear that. You just heard, oh, be afraid, be very afraid. Oh, it's all gonna, you're weak, you're sick, you're gonna get, and that's the placebo effect working in the negative form, so the nocebo effect. So that's actually for sure causing illness. So there's all these crazy things where like, oh, my critical thinking goes, okay, I'm not just going to assume it's right just because you're an authority. That's another illegit logical move, appeal to authority. But the World Health Organization says it's true. It must be true. Well, actually, let's look at if that was true, if authorities were always telling the truth, we should expect to find that through history, yeah? Oh, look here. There are countless examples of authorities not telling the truth, not only being wrong by accident, but being wrong on design, by design, on purpose. So governments lying to people to get into wars and all this sort of stuff. And so actually, No, you can't. That's actually logicians say no. Just because you can't say, oh, this is true because this really cool guy says it's true. No. The most you can say is this person, this organization, have a great track record of predicting things correctly and explaining things clearly and accurately with a very small number, comparatively very small number of internal contradictions or gaps in knowledge. They have a very detailed, accurate, useful, and usable map of the terrain of the world in terms of what is like reality and what ought. So, what decisions should we make? You can say, yeah, they've got a great track record. Therefore, maybe the things they say should be put in the probably pile. That's, I'd say, the highest you can give them instead of just being in the no pile, or the probably not pile, or the possibly pile. Because there's certain people where they go in the probably not pile. For me, like if I see, CNN talking about something related to politics, I go, okay, I need to look into that more, but it's in the probably not pile because I've seen them lying on countless occasions and I've caught them in the act. Not personally, but like seeing someone else talks about it. Some occasionally, some things, where I know, I know for a fact what they're saying is not true. Or others where I've, some of these people podcasts listening to, and then people are talking about it, and then I check it out and go, well, that's true. There are, here they have been caught lying, or in error. And so there are certain, organizations or people who would be in the probably not pile when they say things on certain issues, because it's pattern recognition, and they might be right this time, but most likely they're wrong. And until further notice, until I have the time to look into it, I'm going to assume this. I'm going to assume they're wrong, or I'm going to assume they're right. And if they have got a good track record. Appeal to authority doesn't work. Even in the best case scenario, it's just a probably right. It's never definitely right. Definitely right. It's a funny thing. I mean, there's very few things I think we can be definitely sure of. Maybe we'll finish with that at the end. But so another sip of tea. So basically, we talked about the idea of, how much should you trust? How much should you question? In general, question as much as you can while still being functional in the universe, I guess. You need to have certain presumptions and assumptions, and then you work from that. And then maybe in certain times you can go, okay, now let's question this assumption we've been making. But maybe in other situations, okay, we'll control that variable. Let's go, like running experiments. Let's control this variable. Let's assume that, the government, isn't run by aliens or whatever. And let's go, okay, change these other variables and see what happens and focus on something else. And so, it's very important when you're discussing things to be able to run these thought experiments with people where you go, okay, I know you think this, but let's just say that that's not true for a moment. Let's go study this other side of the network, and vice versa. Me saying, okay, I think you're wrong about that, but all right, I'll go with you. Let's presume that what I think is wrong. Okay, let's go analyze some other part of the node. If that's true, then that would be true in that. And then we might be able to make some progress on some other aspect where if I said, no, but I disagree with that premise of yours, we might never even get to have that progress by analyzing some other little aspect. And then I talked about, people with a certain element of instinct and kind of intuition and just going by feeling of what feels right to me. And I do believe that silent space of consciousness behind, your behind the thinking, is very intelligent and can often tell you what's going on and what's right. And you've got the gut instinct to say, don't go down that dark alley, etc. And the gut, by the way, is full of neurons. Like the nervous system is the solar plexus, right? There's a lot of neural networks there. So it seems like actually, and the chakra systems talk about that, the third chakra. But so it seems there is intelligence in your body for sure, definitely, and it runs your whole body, the cells and everything. So intelligence, we're just kind of talking about intellectual intelligence here, but there is a place for intuition and what do I think? Who do I believe in? It seems like the evidence pretty equally weighed here or here. Sometimes there's a place for, just going by feeling, what feels good. And then by people, do you trust people? I look in people's eyes, and I think often by looking in people's eyes, you can actually see often if some people are untrustworthy. I think you can definitely see it in their eyes, and likewise trustworthy, but not always. But I'd say that's some evidence. That would be intuition at work, I suppose. And then in mentioning kind of piecemeal here and there some aspects of logic and how to detect things. But let's get into the legitimate moves of logic and how to do it, and then the illegitimate. So legitimate, okay, basically, and again, you can look this up online if you want detailed stuff, but I'll just give you some little things which I think are pertinent and kind of important that I think about and apply. So, syllogisms, like that's a very basic, I guess, example of how logic works. So it'd be useful just to know the idea of like, what, you say logic's this thing. What? I don't even believe in logic. I think that's a construction of the patriarchy or something. It's like, well, that's a good question. Like, how do we know how we know things? How do we learn, So if we say, okay, yeah, if we first admit that there is objective truth, which some people say, no, it's all relative. But then I think, okay, that seems like chaos. That seems like a recipe for chaos. How can we play together? How can we engage and work together if we have these different universes, we think? So I think just feasibly, in terms of feasibility, that's not a great idea. But secondly, it doesn't seem to make sense. It seems to be full of contradictions. So this is a primary part of logic, is that which contradicts itself is probably wrong. Now, you might say, oh, no, I believe that things can contradict themselves. Light's a particle and a wave. Well, yeah, there are paradoxes, fair enough. And maybe, to become spiritually awakened, you need to conquer and you need to surrender. But that doesn't make sense. Actually, it does make sense, but just we're using different meanings of the word. So conquer in terms of assert your sovereignty and become the master of your mind, maintain vigilance of consciousness, and kind of let your energy flow forward and rise. But then also surrender in terms of, let that which you can't control, quote unquote, overwhelm you, and just let it. And that by not raising any defense, you will actually maintain control of your consciousness. If you try to defend, that's actually the ego trying to defend, and you get wrapped up in knots because you're trying to fight the inevitable. So I'm afraid of something. I'm going to resist it. And then that fear is actually part of the ego structure. So that'd be an example where you need to assert and, let go. So it's a paradox. But it actually does make sense, though. It's not a contradiction. It's a paradox, which is something that looks like a contradiction, but it's actually not. It's just a tension between two truthful aspects of something. So if you say, yeah, I believe contradictions are fine. Okay, but most people don't. So these are some ways we know things are probably true. Consensus. Consensus of scientists believe blah, blah, blah. Doesn't mean it's true, but it is something. Usually it's true. Consensus of people think the earth is round. Okay, it's probably round, right? So consensus is, but a consensus of scientists say that, the governments who give them their funding for their studies and they're chronically underfunded, like a majority of these scientists say this thing about global warming. I don't assume it's true. I question it because I think, well, what's the harm? And then I do question it and I find, that's contradicted. Al Gore's thing didn't mention that temperatures were much higher 12,000 years ago. You look at Randall Carlson's work and, temperatures have gone way up and down in pretty recent history. And throughout Earth's history, it's always been going up and down. We've had ice ages. So why didn't he mention that? Okay, interesting. Why aren't, 9/11 stuff, why are certain aspects of that never mentioned? Like Tower 7. There was this whole other tower that went down. It wasn't even in the official reports. What's most damning about it is the government's silence, not mentioning it. That's the most suspicious thing. If they had a good explanation, that would be something. But just ignoring it, oh, interesting. Okay, maybe they're being untruthful. So there's all these patterns you can recognize, to bring it back to the point here, that go, okay, well, what this, say, panel on climate change, whatever, I'm not going to take your word for sure. Just because there's a consensus of people here who say something, there's many people who disagree. And it is often the case in history where a minority of experts or a minority of people are actually correct. A minority of scientists 400 years ago or whatever believed the Earth was round, and yet the consensus was wrong. The minority were correct. So we can go, okay, if consensus was always right, then Galileo would have been wrong. But Galileo wasn't wrong. We can measure it through all these things. So therefore, the consensus is not always right. This would be reductio ad absurdum, right? You're following it to its logical conclusion. If it creates a ridiculous situation, then there was some mistake earlier in the process. Just like doing maths, and you can go, oh, I got some crazy answer. I must have made a mistake earlier in the process somewhere. So, and everything else is correct. So, okay, by process of elimination, this thing here must be wrong. Consensus isn't enough to guarantee that it's true, which of course makes sense intuitively. It's very useful to go between intuition and intellect, back and forth, to kind of like the samurai blade, bending it back and forth, strengthening it. So, but nonetheless, here it is something. In general, when there's a consensus, it is some evidence that probably more than 50% likely it's true, unless there's some other mitigating factors that come in, like political. Oh, this would be very useful for political gains, whatever. Okay, then maybe. So, consensus of people would say, yeah, if you've got a bunch of contradictions, no, that you can't have contradictions. That's ridiculous. We don't agree, and it's impractical, etc. Okay, we could go on, but there's a bunch of reasons to think that, okay, there's this established principle that we can get things done in the world and we can solve our problems and we can exploit opportunities and kind of map out the terrain of what is and what should be by basing upon this system of logic where, okay, you can never, you would need logic to justify logic, right? It's like a dictionary is defining itself. All the words and the definitions are within the dictionary already. Nonetheless, it is useful to us to use logic. And so for various reasons, we have built up this system, which is a tool of mapping to reality. And it's not perfect, but it is very useful. And so it says, contradictions are a sign of bad logic, or like non-logic, right? Yes, so that would be one thing, right? So there is a structure, but then how do we know? Okay, but then if we accept, okay, fine, there is a structure to truth. There is one truth, and we can have many maps of it, but there is one terrain which we are mapping. Okay, that's progress, right? Think like a bunch of people these days, what do you call that? Like cultural Marxists or whatever, or postmodernists, etc., wouldn't even agree with that. They say, no, it's all just wish-wash. It's just, it just doesn't make sense. And it's not useful anyway. You can't build a civilization on that. So discarding it. Good luck to you, gentlemen and ladies. So how dare you say we're a binary? So what is the structure of logic? How do we know what is valid approach to truth and what isn't? So that question is very useful, and that's what the basis of logic is. It's epistemology. How do we know what we know? And so that question itself is kind of like, a microcosm of it. Like, how do we know anything? How do we? The first thing we need to learn is how do we learn? And so we look at the evidence, we look for patterns, and basically we notice, when things have fewer contradictions in the theory, it's more useful to us and it creates benevolent outcomes. Okay, that's good. There's certain other patterns, like there's these fallacies, right? The genetic fallacy. When we killed that guy because, or like we didn't do this thing because someone we don't like suggested it. But then it turns out someone we do like is using it and it looks fine. Okay, so we made a mistake before. We thought because, that guy we don't like suggested it was a bad idea, but now someone we do like is using it and there's no problem. Okay, so maybe there's no connection between, the someone who says something and the thing itself, right? You can be, as we mentioned. So that's something that gets incorporated. Okay, so it is fine. There's no problem there to have someone you disagree with in general have a good point. So we can't rule it out, if they're totally ranting and nuts, then maybe you don't want to pay attention to them. But you should be aware that they may have useful material for you, especially if they are quite intelligent, even if you think they're a bit disconnected from wisdom. So, and then we mentioned reductio ad absurdum, being able to notice like that pattern, like, oh, okay, we can figure things out with that. Like, this tool of noticing if things lead to a ridiculous conclusion, then we can know it's not true, right? Like, okay, there's no way that's true, because in that case, that would mean this, but that's not the case. And so we developed these little list of tools. What else is there? So genetic fallacy, straw man fallacy, where you say, oh, you are, you present the weakest version of an argument possible and then shoot it down. You go, haha, look at that. I tore down your weak, stupid argument. But then, well, yeah, but that wasn't actually my argument. You told me this is what I'm saying, but that's not what I'm saying. It doesn't matter. Stop crying. That's pointless. What's the point of that? If you want to get to truth, if you want to actually understand things, then you should give the strongest version of their argument. Because one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to prove them wrong and you're going to refine your own ideas, and in the fight, like exercise, you're going to strengthen yourself and strengthen your ideas and make them clarified, or else you're going to learn something and go, oh, actually, I made the strongest version of their argument I could, and lo and behold, I think, wow, drugs actually should be legalized. And wow, great, I've been liberated from an illusion. I thought this, I went through the process of open-minded exploration combined with critical thinking, and boom, like I am now closer to a clear lens on truth. And it could likely be a mix of those things, where you learn some things and other things you'd still disagree with. So, so there's many other fallacies to be avoided there, or what do you call it? Ad hominem, attacking the man, which is kind of similar to genetic fallacy, but someone's maybe, making you look bad because they're, showing how your ideas don't make sense. And you're like, yeah, but well, you're a degenerate drunk and you just hang out, it's like, okay, what's that got to do with anything though? Because of the genetic fallacy, the nature of that person really doesn't have an effect on their ideas. So what you're actually trying to do is trying to besmirch someone with an appeal to primal emotion. You're trying to hijack the logical process by bringing in the reptilian brain and the disgust or fear or anger impulses to try to make someone become illogical in order to win them over to your ideas so that you can get what you want in the world. So these are some examples of fallacies. Now, the syllogism, which I was mentioning, which is the basic structure of like a logic, how it does work, is, okay, A is B, B is C, therefore A is C. So let's say trees burn. We can notice this. Paper is made of trees. Okay, it's just trees. That's all it is. Therefore, so A is B and B is C. Therefore, A is C. Paper burns. Paper will burn. Paper is a kind of thing which can burn. Even if you've never seen paper burn, if you've seen trees burn, and if you've seen that trees are turned into paper, then you can be very sure that unless there's some sort of other factor going on, paper burns. And then maybe, okay, you test it and lo and behold, correct, right? And so people go, okay, right, so this would be a very simple example, but where we can go, all right, this is a real thing. This is a way that logic works. And we're codifying these things so that we can apply them to very quickly analyze arguments. You read, a 2-page essay someone's written, you can kind of go through and go, okay, what's the main idea here? They're saying they don't think prostitution should be legal because here they're saying it's evil and unnatural. Okay, then here they say it, it's like slavery, and then here and you can go, okay, well here they're saying it's evil or unnatural. However, couldn't you say that it's a natural thing that other animals do? Didn't chimpanzees do this when they were taught how to use tokens, be exchanged for bananas, and the males all gave the females their tokens in order to, have a good time? Oh, okay, well, if it's natural then maybe that's not totally the case. And you could, not to say that you're shutting down that argument immediately, but you might say, you can then engage with that and say, okay, so they're saying it's natural, but what does natural mean? They need to be clear about that. It's too vague, and then here, and we need to talk about it because there are some counterexamples which might say it is natural. So what do we mean by natural? And you could go back and forth there and get into it and maybe learn something, maybe find a point of agreement. And then the thing, that, it's like a slavery thing. You might say, well, why is it slavery? There's a missing premise there. You just jump to that. They say, well, because if they might say, if, the women try to leave, then the pimps, will like attack them or whatever, or they keep them there. Or there's, it's well known that there's human trafficking for this. And then you might say, in response, okay, good, your argument's getting clearer there. So that the logical things are being fleshed out there. You've added steps. Before you had jumped a few steps. Now you've put in the step. Okay, actually, yes, because of, the human trafficking or the pimps being controlling. And then you might reply to that and go, okay, well, in the spirit of getting to the bottom of things, go, okay, yeah, I can see that. But aren't there some women who choose to do it? So doesn't that, maybe you're not talking about prostitution in general, but just about prostitution, maybe your real problem is with slavery, not with prostitution. Maybe that's just one example of what happens when you have slaves. And that, maybe in a world with no slavery, people would be able to choose to be prostitutes if they want. And maybe that would be okay if it's voluntary. And then the person might go, well, okay, I agree that if it's voluntary, that's a different thing. And so you can make progress there. By ignoring all the emotion and just the extra stuff of, extra words or turns of phrase and rhetoric, to make be persuasive. And there's a place for rhetoric, for opening people up and keeping them receptive and getting them to engage with your ideas. But logic is the core of it. It's like, what are you saying? How do you know that it's real? And so you can, reduce, by learning critical thinking, you can kind of distill 2 pages into what's the basic flow of syllogisms and logical flow. They're saying this and this and this, therefore this. And if that's true, well, this other thing is probably true. So therefore, probably this other thing is also true. So you might have one conclusion, which is you're saying definitely true, and another which is probably true. And so this is your contribution to human knowledge. You're saying this is a bit about the terrain we're living in and need to navigate to maximize our happiness and health and well-being and wisdom. And then people can reply to it, engage with it. So when we're all trained in this, it's much easier. People can say something and you don't need to get distracted by accidentally making, these fallacies, which we mentioned before. You can kind of just get to the core of, okay, what's the logical skeleton in terms of syllogisms here? Like, what are they actually saying? Kind of matrix of logic within it. And then, you can engage with each other and kind of make progress. And hopefully, there's a balance between cooperation and competition there, where you need to shoot down certain ideas like, yeah, but you're saying this, but isn't it the case that blah, blah, blah? So you need to be able to question, but then also show respect. And this comes back to the rhetoric thing, being able to be able, especially when you're talking with someone or online, I guess, where it's easy for people to get mad at each other because there's less consequence if you act like a fool. There's no threat of physical violence, for example. But I guess in either case, like the place for civility and being, human decency and kindness in order to keep people, where you might say certain things where I think this isn't really necessary, it's not really relevant to the point, but I feel like some primal emotion of us against them, me against you is rising up in my conversation partner, I'm going to help liberate them from the threat of that emotion by connecting. And I can say, look, I mean, I mean, no disrespect to these people who blah, 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 but I do think blah, 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 blah. Also, I think you made a really good point about this thing. I think we really agree that blah, blah, blah. And you can mention something you agree on. And you might think that it's demeaning or stupid, but you're trying to maintain a flow of communication and logic so that we can have a real conversation. And so that also has a place. And that is not disrespecting or patronizing the intelligence of your conversation partner, but it's just being honest. Like, well, look, I think there's a bit of primal emotion rising up here, and that poses a risk of derailing the logic. So, and maybe that could happen to me too. You can admit that, and so just try to keep it open. And so there's that balance of give and take there, of pushing but not pushing too much, trying to find a balance where you can have a real communication and learn. So what else about the mechanics of actual logic working properly? So I mentioned, lack of contradictions and an internal consistency. And it explains more things than other theories with, I guess you could say, with a minimum of internal contradiction. And if it has, so that's explanatory power to describe what's going on, but then also you could say predictive power. Then that adds, oh, you predicted this. Okay, then that's also relevant because we need to use these to navigate the terrain of life. And then also descriptive and prescriptive. So saying this is a good idea, you should do it. I guess ideas where, we should, a lot of that I think is trial and error. And I think a lot of the logic, you could make the argument that a lot of what's going on is really trial and error. But that logic is kind of a distillation of trial and error. Just like stories are distillations of myths, which are distillations of countless real events which happened. And so the core lessons, the lowest common denominators, are being preserved now in these stories, where they've got characters who are unique enough that they're engaging and interesting, like it's something live happening new, and yet there's something fundamental and universal enough that it's applicable to many, many other people. And so we love stories for that reason. It's very important for learning and just it's fun as well. But so in a similar way, I suppose logic could be said to be the distillation of all these experiences of trial and error and things that go well or things that don't go well, and situations where, people were applying this type of logic, this system, and it led to this outcome where we totally got something completely wrong. It didn't go how we thought it would, or, including for like kind of prescriptive things where it's like, this is what we should do. And, we, allowed puberty blockers for children, and then now there's thousands and thousands of teenagers who are very, very unhappy that it seems like when they were too young to consent, it seems that certain irreversible procedures have been done to them. So this is something that's happening now. It's very pretty intense. These, girls who say, well, I can't be a girl now because I, whatever my parents were, whatever, right? That's a whole other subject. But that would be a case where it seemed like, freedom's a good thing. Let people do whatever. But then like, but wait a minute. Now there are these people who have had their futures taken from them, and they've had irreversible surgeries, and they can't. So these girls can't become mothers now. But that now their dream is back to the original thing. They want to be a mother. They don't want to be a boy. And so that would be one example where you could make the case, which I would, that we shouldn't be giving puberty blockers to children, and that should be something when you're an adult. If it's still something you want to do, then you can go do it. But like the whole trans thing for children, it's like, you might not be aware, this is actually a very big issue. It's happening a lot around the world, affecting many, many, many children. I don't know the exact numbers, but I think it's been estimated at perhaps millions, at least hundreds of thousands. So where there's been the permanent surgeries, so altering the hormones of children and even surgeries and things. So I would make the case like, you can see why you may have prescribed the idea of like, these people will be more comfortable and, they'll have good effects if we kind of get them early on into this other, gender or whatever. But then actually with time we kind of realize, oh, there's a lot of people who are getting real bad experiences from this and saying that actually, they didn't, now they feel like that all along they had kind of gone down some dark path that wasn't what they wanted. Their parents, maybe for whatever reason, whether it's political, affiliation or sympathies with a certain ideology or frame of reference, that they thought it was a good idea. And so, or, there's countless other things. Like we could say, oh, we should, what's an example? Yeah, okay, we should, in Ireland, like enforce Irish in schools, make everyone learn it, and then, it turns out like, the language just, didn't flourish at all under that, and that a lot of people resented it, and, like, because it was always being jammed down their throats. So you go, okay, maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe we should adapt and make it voluntary or whatever, right? So this would be the feedback of trial and error. And I think that applies both for description and prescription with logic. And we have these processes, these kind of quote unquote timeless truths of like, what are fallacies and what aren't. But I think a lot of that is basically the core of these experiences of trial and error with the universe, and the results we get, which we like or we don't like. So now for using this, okay. So one example would be like when you're learning something, I think anytime I think I want to learn something, okay, what is true? And I don't know, I look up both sides of it. I look up, okay, maybe someone says, oh yeah, this food, soy, is really bad for you. Soy is actually terrible. I go, okay. I don't know who to believe. From my experience, I, in general, trust if you can, but, always question. But so, I question the dietary, authorities and looked up things. And then lo and behold, years and years ago, I found many examples of corruption and lying and just general mistake and ego, people getting attached to their ideas and defending it as if it's part of themselves, like to the death they're going to defend their idea. So I said, okay, I can't just trust them and their appeal to authority. I need to go figure it out for myself. How do I do it? I look up harmful or negative health effects, soy. Enter. Look it up. Look at many different articles and see what it says. And see things where it's being repeated a few times. Okay, well, probably there's some truth to it. It's more likely. And maybe someone's saying something and I go, okay, yeah. And then they say something which I know is not true. Okay. Or which I think is probably not true. Then I will go, okay, there are other claims here. I need to put it, in suspension there. Okay, maybe I'm not sure about those points. And maybe even other people have said that point could be wrong because it's mixed in here with this stuff that I know is not true or I think is not true. And then you go through that and you try to figure out, and if you start noticing patterns, okay, this thing seems to be said by a bunch of people who make no other errors that I'm aware of. So as far as I can tell, their logic's flawless, then the information is good, and they're all saying that this thing is true, this fact. Okay, then probably that's true. So you try to distill it, and you go, now these things, some people said that, who seem like legit, they said it, but also some kind of people who seem to be, their grammar's all off, their spelling's terrible, they're not taking care to avoid these simple mistakes. How do I know that they're taking care to know what's true and to do diligent research or whatever it is? Or they're saying this thing's true, but then they're also saying other things which I believe are not true. Okay, so then maybe there's a lower level of stuff where maybe that's true. And maybe there's some other things which I think, no, that's probably ridiculous. It doesn't make sense. Or only one person mentioned it. This other person mentioned all this other stuff and some insightful things. And their language is very good and beautiful and shows great cognitive capacity to express things so clearly. So probably that cognitive capacity has also been at work during their investigations of these topics. And they didn't mention this. So I'd imagine they would have mentioned it if it was a thing. Okay, so that's probably not true. So et cetera. You have that thing. Now, and then you do it the other side. You go, okay, soy, beneficial health effects. look it up. Okay, fine. And then and do the same process, right? And also why soy isn't bad, or soy harmful debunked, right? And look it up, right? And so you just go back and forth between the two sides, and instead of just going, who's right, and try to read one, read both of them. Read both of them and see, do that steel manning thing, try to see how they could be right, and then critique them and check, and then you go through and compare them. Like, okay, who contradicts who? They said this, but this person said something different. Okay, who's right? And then maybe you'll research that micro topic and go into it. Figure, okay, well, it seems that probably this is the fact. Okay, so that person was wrong, that person was right. Okay, and so then you can start to figure out who is more credible, right? You're figuring out both what is the balance of, is it definitely not, or definitely yes, or maybe not, maybe yes, probably not, probably yes, etc. The scale of credibility or believability, both of ideas and of people who are filtering ideas for you. And so you do that and you match them up and compare them, and you eventually can come to some sort of conclusion of, okay, what's going on with soy or whatever it is. And this is very important because there are countless examples, where, people who are meant to be protecting us and being our intellectual class who we can rely upon are asleep, either asleep at the wheel or captured by basically money, money and power, I guess you could say, maybe malice. But there's certain institutions where there are things they recommend are definitely, I could say, insane and not good advice, and yet it's being put out in these simplified narratives which exclude all the contradictions with evidence. And they will accuse their enemies of the things that they do, like, oh, you're being unscientific, like the COVID thing. It's all, these people are being deeply unscientific, deeply irrational, are accusing everyone else of that, so accusing everyone of misinformation while they mislead the public on health science. And basically, before COVID, there was already a revolution in progress in the field of health, returning to holistic understandings of health, that the body is, you can't isolate in any system from the body. It's all part of one big system, and so things affect each other. You can't, use antibiotics to kill a bunch of bacteria without also killing the good bacteria and maybe causing some other problem. So you need to keep in mind the effects on other systems. And this is mirrored in our relationship with nature, where we think we can just cut down a forest and it's fine. But then, now the rain stops. Oh, interesting. Okay, it was connected. We didn't realize. So there's a great, I'd say it's pretty crazy if you're actually applying critical thinking these days. It's a really enjoyable story. It's a very dramatic, wonderful movie with lots to be learned and experienced. But there are, I would say, probably the majority of major institutions, very big level institutions, there's a lot of have been captured by money, by corporatocracy, meaning that they're not on your side, or they're not always on your side. In certain things they will be, sure, but in many cases you cannot rely on them to have full loyalty to you, because there could be situations where, there's a lot of money to be made, but we need to, say, make people do something which isn't good for them. Or we need to go to war here, even though it's going to be terrible for everyone. We're going to make a bunch of money. Let's do it. And then the media and whoever tell you that, this is what's right. So, and then of course there is still, although it's been shrinking under the burden of this expanding bureaucracy of the state, which is kind of using up more and more of our resources and shrinking the civil society of kind of more decentralized institutions. But nonetheless, there are, of course, still countless institutions which are not captured, but those that have a great influence over our lives, and especially those which convey information. Many of those, I would say definitely most of the large ones, are shockingly, displaying a disconnect from logic and evidence-based thinking. So that goes for major media, which are controlled by 6 corporations. Lo and behold, these days the vast number of large media outlets are controlled by only 6 corporations. Now that's something where I don't know what those corporations are. I may have seen their labels at some point. I can't remember, but I hear people who I trust saying it. I hear this person, then I hear a new person saying it. So I go, okay, that's probably true. But yeah, full disclosure, I'm not certain that's true, but probably. And there's the limits of memory and there's the limits of time. Like I said, the process about looking into soy, there's just not enough time to do this for everything. So we do need to trust. Who can we trust? And you follow, use your God-given gift for pattern recognition and to figure out who is a reliable conduit of information. And you try to be the same for others. And then hopefully we'll have enough people reliably, with good faith, trying to understand things and share awareness. And we can have a grassroots healing of these institutions where, we don't want to tear anything down, but like just bringing sanity back to the world. Because we're at a point where I think critical thinking en masse, you, me, and Dupree, everyone, just kind of applying critical thinking and being more careful about what we believe is the golden ticket to a normal society where rather than an apocalyptic society. So because technology and just is expanding and consciousness is expanding to this and kind of developing to the extent where the shadows, light is being thrown upon the shadows, and there's a lot of institutions which say have been making money off of war, etc., where if things just continued as they are for 20 years, the number of people who are aware of the crimes that have been committed is probably going to be untenable for certain people. So there are certain defense mechanisms kicking in, which have been kicking in. So there's a bit of a race between awareness and totalitarianism and indoctrination going on. Has been going on for a while. And so that's something we can all do, is just to see as clearly as we can, to speak as honestly and clearly as we can, and thereby to be part of the right side of history, where you can enjoy your life here, but also for our children and our grandchildren, all of us are kind of building that sustainable, happy society, happy country we can all enjoy. And that goes, I think, for anyone, even people who aren't applying critical thinking, or they're applying it, but their hearts are set on dominance of others. Someone, whatever, in some corporation that's raping the planet, or some government which is enslaving its citizens, or certain, global bodies which might be trying to do the same thing. The whole World Economic Forum, escapade with whatever they're up to about, penetrating, Klaus Schwab talking about penetrating cabinets and how he's got, operatives all over the world in cabinets of, Justin Trudeau, Macron, and mentions even Putin, the young global leaders, all this stuff. If you're not aware of that, there'll be something to look into. World Economic Forum, very bizarre and interesting, but seems like a James Bond plot. But there's a bunch of billionaires who think, let's improve capitalism by centralizing, oversight. So the billionaires will make sure that billionaires aren't doing anything wrong. And it's like, okay, interesting. But that's a side point. But the main thing, I think, is that critical thinking is a very useful way of increasing consciousness. And it is, consciousness is more important, like just pure awareness. That's how I see it. I really believe that, that this is the core of sanity. And yet to be able to engage with reality and map out the terrain in more detail, and indeed to be able to engage with those who aren't just feeling or don't have experience with that field of pure love and consciousness, and who would go, what are you talking about? That's all nonsense. Engaging with this critical thinking and being able to communicate ideas and kind of map out reality in this sense of, these approximations of the terrain, which we can only really behold in silence, mental silence. But to be able to map it out with critical thinking is very useful for, I think both for just making, improving the world, creating a happier place, a more beautiful place, a place which we will be proud of, where we can all be happy, healthy, and strong, as Wim Hof would say. We can share the love. Now, what can we know for certain? Great question. I think, what's attributed to Socrates? All I know is that I know nothing, which is pretty sage, I'd say, because it kind of, it's like a paradox, but it resolves itself very beautifully, almost like a dance where you're flinging yourself off this way, but then the momentum conveys into your partner's body and they pull you in the same way and you can keep moving sustainably. But all I know is that I know nothing. So it's not saying I know nothing. Oh, that's a paradox. Haha, I actually know something. Oh, no, I don't. Oh, ha, ha. But I think it's really in the deeper sense, the more valid sense, it's saying the state of not knowing is the state of consciousness, the state of thoughtless awareness, like this. Okay. And so there's an embodied, I'm feeling my body, I'm looking at things, I'm kind of enjoying a feeling of humor and mirth while I'm exiting the thought stream, which I couldn't do for most of my life, only fairly recently been able to do it. With practice, you can do it. And very relaxing. But that then rejuvenates your thought processes and grounds you to the reality. Here is the reality. And so that's all you really know. But in spiritual terms, you're here. You're aware, you're conscious, you're present, you've no doubt. And yet, on the intellectual level, there's no thinking, so you know nothing. That kind of knowledge, intellectual knowing, is turned off temporarily. So all I know is that I know nothing. And you could also say, oh, no, I know that I know something, like in the spiritual sense. But in terms of words, etc., it's what it's conveying to me, that statement, is the limits of linguistic understanding, and that this is a very useful tool to be applied to improve the world and to bring upon the kingdom of good fortune, which we all seek. And just imagine, like this, there's so much darkness and heaviness in this time. The COVID thing especially, like you can notice it's still here. Like it's very striking to me. It's just so gloomy. And you can feel, that's another thing about critical thinking, feeling the energy behind people's words. Like, oh yeah, you're saying all the right things, but I'm not feeling much love here. I'm feeling a lot of fear and kind of darkness. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I'm feeling a very dark vibe from you, And you feel that, and we should pay attention to that. That is evidence. Ancestrally, we're descended from the survivors of the survivors of the survivors, etc. And we have these instincts built into us to notice signals from the environment. And these are such signals. And, I'm yet to see certain, billionaires or whatever. And, hey, some billionaires are really cool. Nothing against billionaires per se, but politically connected billionaires who are trying to remove other people's freedoms. That's a bit of another story. And, I still won't hate them or anything. We're all brothers and sisters in my mind. In fact, we're all one. We're all just the universe. We're literally in my, if you ask me, again, I don't want to create some sort of blockage in the listener by saying oh, I know this or something. But so I'll just say, more humble, offer it where you could take it as food for thought, is the way I see it is that we are all one. We are literally one great soul, one life, you could call it God, living through all the roles. Just like there's one reader and there's 12 different characters in the book, but it's the one reader who's reading it all. So in the same way, there is one cosmic reader who is also writing the story as it's read through each character in first person, unlike when you're reading a book. So, no love lost to them. However, I do care about setting boundaries and creating the ideal world that we want through honest articulation of what we see when we try to clarify our vision to the utmost through critical thinking and mindfulness. What can we know? Ultimately, just I am. Here I am. Consciousness exists, and therefore reality exists. Even if it's an illusion, even if consciousness is an illusion, but then if you're saying it's an illusion, and so therefore the self is an illusion, and maybe the whole universe is an illusion. Okay, how come this illusion is being noticed from within? My vacuum cleaner, as far as I know, doesn't have an internal sense of like, here I am, I'm a vacuum cleaner. And then a robot doesn't seem to have that, Maybe they would if you got more advanced, who knows? And that's just one, to put that for those who would, agree with that. That's one way. They don't have it. So why do we, if we're just robots or something, why do we have this sense of being here? And if you say it's an illusion, I would say you need to stop being so lazy and start meditate, sit down, meditate, and then, you're going to find like that there is such a thing as consciousness, and it's not words, but everyone is able to access this. And, I'd say it's about time that a lot of people who are very, very good at wielding critical thinking, take the responsibility to, with all due respect, take the responsibility to step outside of thinking for a second and master the skill of tuning into the body and the breath in order to thereby tune into the no thought consciousness, which is a state of the highest wakefulness. As Eckhart Tolle says, and he, adds an addendum to say that this, as Eckhart Tolle says, the highest state of something like this, the highest state of understanding is not thinking, but consciousness. The highest state of understanding is not thinking, but consciousness. Or awareness. And then it has an addendum of that's a revolutionary statement, which it is, because it seems animal. Yeah, but what about animals? Reductio ad absurdum. They don't have thinking. You're saying they're more aware? Well, no, it's like an improvement. You got animals who they're just in the moment. Hey, what time is it, Mr. Tiger? What are you talking about? It's just now, right? It's always now. They have no concept of time. So there's like it would seem, right? So a limited intelligence, engagement with thinking, it seems. And then we don't know exactly what they're thinking, but it seems, stands to reason, like there's evidence of, we can test animals and things and notice, they would be able to, if they had a certain level of intelligence like we have, you would think they would be able to do certain things. So we can test it to some extent. But harder with maybe like cetaceans and dolphins, and stuff like that, who I believe have bigger brains than us. And just because they haven't modified their environment, we assume we're more intelligent. But they might actually be more intelligent than us, but just it's expressed in a different way, or they're just hanging out, But anyway, so animals, with the thoughtless awareness, are at here a kind of certain level of consciousness. But then we go above that, we get to the humans who are thinking. And then we get above that, let's say humans who are thinking a bit, but mostly they're kind of in that state of presence, And then further down the evolutionary chain, you get these humans like us who are just really deeply obsessed and obsessively involved in information, where we're almost cyborgs. We've got these, can't put down our phones, and we've got so much information coursing through us, where we're thinking constantly. And yet above that is the human who is able to think like that, is able to study and absorb information on that level and converse with people like that, and yet is able to turn off the thinking whenever they want, at will. And that is the state of empty mind that you can have when you're able to have full mind with thinking whenever you want. That is the highest state of awareness on this planet. I could say, I'm sure there's higher states elsewhere, I would imagine. But so what do we know? Well, not through thinking, but thinking can be useful, but basically all we can know is what we can know by direct observation. And direct observation is not a thought process. It is a seeing, a spiritual seeing, where you are aware. I'm looking at my microphone. Here I am. I can look at the lattice of metal across it, and I can kind of zoom in on it and imagine it's like a 1,000 kind of highway bridges going over each other, and zoom in on the metal and just consider that metal could be or it could be huge pipes like an oil pipeline. The shape of it's very similar. It's just a different scale. And I zoom in on it, and I know that it's 99% empty space, and there's protons, electrons, and neutrons composing it, and that's all made of energy. And ultimately, it would seem consciousness, given that I am conscious, I am present, and it seems everything is one. Here would be some critical thinking, right? Some logic. I know I'm present. Here I am. So I'm conscious. And everything seems to be one, because what would all the boundaries between things be made of? And then we know from scientific observation, everything's like empty space and just energy. Matter seems to be a state of energy accumulating in certain shapes or something, or positions. It's kind of a series of vibrational fields, but everything seems to be of one essence. And then if it wasn't, what would the essence in between it be made of? And then surely, even if there was an essence in between it, that would all be universe stuff. And so it's all just made out of this one putty. It was all one, even by a conventional explanation, during the Big Bang. So how could it be one thing and then suddenly split into two essences? So it is one essence, and I know that I'm here, and I am, therefore, the essence of all things must be my essence. And I know that my essence is consciousness, what we call consciousness, or presence, or awareness, or cognition, or understanding, or realization. And here I am. So therefore, you are led to the conclusion that, in fact, the whole universe is consciousness, or we could say consciousness is the universe. And so I would say that's what we know. We know that we know what we can know through direct observation. And then you could, maybe make the case for a few things like this, that the universe itself is consciousness, through some very careful, or I think careful, like syllogisms there of like what's going on with logic. But ultimately what you can know is what cannot be put into words. But more or less, a rough translation might be to be here, that we are, So this has been a message from the computer and from yourself in another body about the nature of critical thinking and how to learn stuff and what's real and how to know what's real. And most of all, don't forget to be silent. Whoops. Much love, everybody. Good luck doing whatever you're doing. Keep up the good work.